Hello and welcome to another video by Perfect Scores. This is Preetinder Kaur and we are covering grade 11 biology. We are currently doing the anatomy and physiology of plants and animals, and what we are going to cover in this video is structure of the dicot and the monocots with respect to three important organs, that is the root, the stem and the leaf. So let's get started with the first thing, that is a dicot root. So here's a diagram for you, and as you can see, this is an example of the transverse section of a dicot root, and this particular one is for a sunflower root. So as you can see, the outermost layer of a dicot root is the epidermis, and sometimes there are certain cells in the epidermis that can become elongated into root hairs. And remember, these root hairs, they are always unicellular, not multicellular. Apart from that, you can see the cortex, which is the middle portion. Now the cortex is made up of thin-walled parenchyma, and I suppose you already know what is parenchyma. We've already done that in the previous few videos. And as you can also observe, this thin-walled parenchyma has intercellular spaces between the different cells. So that is about the cortex. The next layer that you can see is that of the endodermis, which is a single layer of barrel-shaped cells. And it's a single layer. And these cells, they have tangential and the radial cell walls, which have the deposits of a material called suberin in the form of strips known as Casparian strips. So it's a waxy material that does not allow water to move through it, and that is the function of endodermis. The next layer is that of the pericycle. Now remember one thing, apart from endodermis, all these other layers, the inner ones, these are also known as the stele, S-T-E-L-E. So coming to the pericycle has thick-walled parenchyma, and then you have the protoxylem, which is the xylem that was formed initially. Then this portion over here, this is the metaxylem. Then is the central portion called the pith, and finally you have the purple colored, the bluish violet colored cells over here, which constitute the phloem. So that is the structure of the dicot root. Additional thing you need to know is that the parenchyma cells that are existing between the xylem and the phloem, they are sometimes also known as a conjunctive tissue. So that is the basic information on the dicot root. Let's move on to the information of the monocot root. Well, they're quite similar to each other. They have the root hair, the epidermis is there, the cortex, the endodermis, the pericycle, the phloem. Now the protoxylem, this is where the difference is quite visible between a dicot and a monocot. Now you can see in dicot there were only about 4 of these bundles, but in a monocot root the protoxylem usually has about 6 or more than 6 bundles, so we can say that it is polyarch in nature. And the pith is larger and it's more well developed, and obviously then you have the metaxylem as well. So that is the structure of the monocot root. The next thing is the dicot stem. Now here are two sections of the dicot stem, and I'll be going through both of them simultaneously. The outermost is the epidermal layer, which is over here, the epidermal hair, which is part of the epidermis. Now epidermis is always the outer protective layer. It's covered by a thin layer of cuticle, and sometimes it may have a few stomata on it and even a few trichomes. So let me just put trichomes and stomata on it. And then you have 3 subzones. You have the hypodermis, which is this part, and then you have the cortical layers, and finally the innermost, which is the pith. So as you can see in this diagram over here, you have the epidermis, below that the hypodermis, then comes the parenchyma layer, then is a layer of cells called the endodermis, which is this part, the wavy thing. Then you have the pericycle, the vascular bundles of xylem and phloem, and then finally you have these medullary rays, and this central part that is known as the pith. Coming to this diagram over here, you have the epidermis, and in the hypodermis as well, you have the collenchyma and parenchyma, the endodermis. After that, you have the pericycle, where you have the vascular bundles of phloem and protoxylem and metaxylem, and then there's a layer of cambium as well. And finally, the innermost layer is that of the pith. So that is the structure of the dicot stem. And one more thing you can observe over here is that medullary rays are present. Now these medullary rays, they are made up of parenchyma. So we can say these are parenchymatous cells. Additionally, the vascular bundles, they are arranged in the ring form. So the ring arrangement of vascular bundles is present. The next thing that we need to know is about the monocot stem. So it has a hypodermis that is made up of sclerenchyma, which is the next layer, next to the outermost layer, which is the epidermis. Within that, you have the vascular bundles that are scattered throughout in this diagram as well as in this diagram. And finally, then you have the ground tissue as well. Now, the sclerenchyma also gives rise to what is known as the bundle sheath. And the vascular bundles, as you can see, they are conjoint. That means the xylem and the phloem, they are present together and they are closed. They're not exposed from any side. So that is the structure of the monocot stem. The next important thing that you need to know is the dicot leaf. This is a DS section, a dorsiventral section, and there are three parts. The epidermis, which is of two parts. One is adaxial, which is present on the upper side. It has lesser or sometimes zero stomata as compared to the lower side abaxial epidermis. So that is your first layer. So let me write down the layers over here. You have the epidermis. The second layer is that of the mesophyll, which in a dicot leaf is of two types. One is palisade, the other is spongy. You will see in monocot leaves, the mesophyll is of only one type. And in this case, the dicot leaf, the mesophyll is either palisade with fewer intercellular spaces, or it can be spongy mesophyll. So that is the second layer. And the third one is the vascular system, which is made up of xylem and phloem, as you can see this part over here. So the bundle sheet is present outside the vascular bundle of xylem and phloem. You have the adaxial epidermis, then comes the palisade mesophyll, then the spongy mesophyll with the air cavities, and then you have this substomatal cavity, and finally at the lower end you have the abaxial epidermis. Now one more thing about the mesophyll is that mesophyll usually has a composition made of parenchyma, and most of these cells, they also have chloroplasts, so they can perform the functions of producing food. The vascular bundles, they are usually found in the veins and in the midrib, and they're also surrounded by the bundle sheath cells. So this was all about the dicot leaf. The next you need to know is about the monocot leaf, and that is an isobilateral section. As you can see, the adaxial and the abaxial epidermis, now both of these, they have the stomata. So that is one difference. One thing that is different from a dicot leaf, stomata are present on both. And another thing is mesophyll is not differentiated into palisade and spongy. There's only one kind of mesophyll. Now another thing that I want to mention is in special plants, like in case of grasses, there are certain adaxial epidermal cells that get converted into cells known as bulliform cells. Now these are large, empty, colorless cells, and when these cells, they have absorbed a lot of water and they've become really turgid, at that point of time the leaf surface is completely exposed. Alright, so that is all about the grasses, the special case. Apart from that, you just need to know the main layers, that is the epidermis, the mesophyll, and finally the vascular bundles made up of xylem, and you have the substomatal cavity around the stoma. So that is all that you need to know, and so what we've done in this video quickly is information on the dicots and monocots. with respect to the stem, the root, and the leaf. So thank you so much for watching this video.